It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulson and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? It is a summer mailbag edition of Take Command. That's Logan Paulson. I am Craig Hoffman. And it is time to answer nonsensical questions about football and some sensical questions about football.
Some of them are sensical, probably.
Some of them
right?
are sensical. We're going to start with a self-described stupid question, and I'm really pumped about it. So, by the way, the mailbag questions this week were probably the best batch we've ever gotten. We asked for some more creative, like, hey, not quite as urgent. It's the off season. Like, let's have some fun. And you guys delivered with some really fun hypotheticals. So appreciate that. And we got a couple more weeks of this before training camp begins. So obviously on Thursday, we will do our defensive position group rankings. So just like we did the offense last week, which everyone agreed with. Oddly, Logan, no, say Eagles fans got in our comments about Jalen Hurts being ranked third in our quarterback. That didn't happen. Everyone universally agreed with our unimpeachable analysis.
I wasn't sure about that. When we did it, I was like, oh, I wonder how this is going to go over. Because I honestly, I felt pretty good about it. But the quarterback thing, I was like, I bet you people are going to be pissed about this.
Yeah, they were. The Eagles fans found it. And so it is what it is.
Good for them.
Yeah, good for look, if my guy went to 2 of 3 Super Bowls and he was ranked third in the division behind a guy who was a rookie last year and Dak Prescott, who's never made it, conference championship game, I'd probably be pretty pissed too. And I say it that way. We should probably go back and change the rankings. But it is what it is. Anyway, the point is, we'll do the defense on Thursday, so look forward to that, and we'll continue the mailbag questions until then. Starting with a brilliant our guy Steven, who did the charity thing with us last year, made us look like fools on trivia. He gets the show, Logan. He gets the show. Hey, Craig, I think the offseason is a good time to ask a potentially stupid question about defense, so here goes. I think it's a potentially stupid because I've never seen a certain scenario done, and since there's a lot of smart people in the NFL, it's probably never been done for a reason. But it has to do with rushing the passer against great offensive lines. Sometimes it feels like a waste of resources because the rush won't get home most of the time. But to make the question a little less stupid, and due to my dislike of watching prevent defenses, I'll ask about a specific scenario. So here we go. Let's lock in. Say a team is down by 7 with under 2 minutes to go. So time is not on their side. So the offense down 7, 2 minutes to go. If they have a great offensive line, why wouldn't the defense just drop 11 into coverage? Unless I'm misreading the rules, those 5 offensive linemen are now completely obsolete unless the quarterback runs. But if he passes, they can't go forward more than 2 yards. So now you have 11 defenders covering 5 receivers. Maybe defenses don't do this with Lamar and Jaden, but most don't have running QBs like them. So in this scenario, maybe you drop your 2 best D-line athletes 5 to 6 yards, drop your best linebacker 8 to 10 yards, and the rest are DBs. Yes, the quarterback will have all day to throw, but again, it's under 2 minutes, and they don't have the luxury of time, and finding an open receiver against 11 athletic dudes can't be easy. And add in that the offense wasn't expecting this, so you have the element of surprise as well. Again, I know it's a stupid question, but why is it so stupid? Best, Steven.
Yeah, actually, I don't think it's that stupid, honestly. I think
when you get to the specific scenario, it's actually not that stupid.
Yeah, when I was thinking about it, like when you were going through the different parameters there for the drill, like I was like, in a world where if you get 11 guys on the field that are all coverage players, now I think you might run into an issue from like a roster depth standpoint is how many good coverage players do you have? But let's say hypothetically you had all 6-year corners out there, a couple safeties, and guys that were really good in coverage, and you played like a version of like 2-man where you basically like doubled every player and then had 2 shell safety over top, like. And in a 2-minute situation where the ball's got to be out, like, I don't really hate that idea. You know what I mean? I think it gives you a lot of flexibility. I think the thing that freaks people out, and this is just like having talked with defensive coordinators specifically about like prevent defenses, drop 8, drop 9, whatever we're doing. Obviously like on the Hail Mary, Chicago dropped 10. You know what I mean? Like you drop all these. Well,
no, because they had guys that were coming after Jaden.
It's like 2 rushes or 1 rushers, whatever it is, 1 or 2 rushers. And in those situations, that's perfectly normal. I think when you talk to defensive coordinators is like when you do not have any rush, or like even if it's like 1 person, 2 people, is you run into this issue where like there's no cap on the defense really, right? There's no ceiling, right? So like the rush does a couple things. 1, keeps the quarterback in the pocket. A, B, it kind of makes it difficult to attack way down the field. So all of a sudden, if you're just like playing 11 on 5 or whatever this coverage is we're going to do here, like there is a possibility that someone gets way down the field and behind the defense, which leads to an explosive play. So I think that would be the concern. That's a concern in like drop 8, for example. So drop 8, for people who don't know, is just basically like you rush 3, you drop the other 8 guys in coverage, usually at some type of zone. And the idea is that you get the quarterback to pat the football. He's unsettled. He makes an errant throw or he throws the football away. If you don't have any rush, like my concern would be like someone falls down, there's a dude that's 20 yards behind your safety, and the quarterback, because there's no rush, has time to kind of evaluate each thing and get that ball down there. And so I think that like that would be the ultimate concern, is that even though you are going to be awesome in coverage and in a 2-minute situation, I think because there's no rush, like the likelihood of an explosive play increases, in my opinion.
Yeah, you in some ways actually crank up your risk factor because they just might chuck it deep and pass interference, like people run into each other. Like there's definite downside to it. And I think too, like I guess if you wanted to do true double teams across the board, all 5, so 5 eligibles, that's 10 dudes, two for 1, and then a single safety who's just like, your job is to make sure no one gets deep. Like we're playing 2-on-1 times 5 with one dude who like you might as well stand on the goal line to make sure.
I mean,
like
shoot,
you come up with that. You could do an 11-man zone thing, but like with an 11-man zone, obviously the bubbles are pretty tight if you're thinking like a Madden screen. But also then some of those guys are kind of rendered useless. Like would you then overload it? Like I don't.
Well, it's
not
too,
stupid, but it's also not optimal.
Is like, like even if you were doing that, like maybe playing double teaming everybody up isn't the best move, but like you play man, you have 5 guys playing some version of match, but then you have like a cover 2 shell. You have enough people to do that, right? Or maybe it's cover 4. You have 4 guys crazy deep over top, then you have a hook, like a lurk player in the middle of the field there. Like I think that's actually like a pretty sweet idea. I do, again, like it has to be a very specific scenario. But I do also think the problem is like when you give that quarterback back there unlimited time and limited opportunity, it becomes real dicey. Like you just the whole defense. This is maybe the crux of it. The defense is constructed to get the ball out in about 2.5 seconds, right? Like that's what it's built to do. Like every single rule of the defense is designed to do that. So all of a sudden, when you push that out to 10, 15, 20 seconds in some cases, like I don't care. It's going to fall apart, right? It's like basically like when you go play pickup basketball and someone's like holding the ball at the point for a long time and people are just running around. At some point, one of those dudes is going to find a way to get open in that 30-second shot clock. And so I think that's what you're running into is like you just.
Well, and to be specific to your basketball example, it would be like if you have that dude at the point, but there's no one guarding the ball.
Right. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Someone will at some point get open, and it's just how open is that person going to be? And I think in this example, in a 2-minute situation, and maybe you could do it with like 10 seconds left in the game, something like that, like where it's a little bit tighter in terms of like capping the throw. But these quarterbacks now, man, they're too good. Like I remember watching Tony Romo in 2012, and this is something like maybe this scarring of my past is informing this decision, but we played a lot of drop 8 in the red zone. Like we'd show blitz and we'd get into drop 8. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, cause you could tell he was unsettled, but he would just kind of sit there, buy a little time. He'd wait. It was like a 6-second down, and 6 seconds when you're used to like 2.5 feels like an eternity. And he would just find Jason Witten for a touchdown. He did 2 times in that game. I just was like, man, like this is the problem. The quarterback, the receivers, the way they understand spacing is too good. So if there's no rush and I'm just standing back there, at some point, at some moment, either I'm going to take a shot down the field or I'm going to find a hole player or I'm going to find someone near the sideline. And it's just like that's the nature of it. And I think maybe there's a more specific like end of half, like and they're taking a shot or they're in like kind of maybe like the strike zone. So the 40 going in and we got to defend all the grass. And the clock's our friend. Maybe that's a scenario where that would work, but I think the quarterback's too good. The space is too much. The field's too big, and they're going to find a way to get that ball completed. And you think you're just kind of fingers crossed that it's not going to be for an explosive play. So I think that's kind of where I'd fall on that ultimately.
Yeah, I don't hate it because if it's specific to the scenario too, like let's add one more caveat: no timeouts. right?
Yeah.
Because like, can you always find a spot somewhere, especially if you have all day and you get some yardage? Yeah. And if it's really close, then you just get up to the line of scrimmage again and you spike it, and you can very quickly get the ball down the field. I guess you could like do a press situation, so you have some guys pressing, some guys, but like eventually you got to cover all the grass. But the idea of like, okay, it's a 12-second down as long as we don't give up an explosive, and then it's going to take, either it's incomplete and you have to do it again, and now we've had one play in the time that you wanted to get like 3 or 4 or 3 off of quick out of bounds, that kind of stuff. Or you do get a completion, but now it's taken a bunch of time, and we almost have 45 seconds of game time run off the clock because it's a 12-second play. By the time you get back up, get everybody lined up again, like I can see it's not outrageous, and especially if the team doesn't have a plan. Like if you give an offensive coach a week to prepare for this, maybe. But like if it's, let's say you get, they get the ball, you punt it away, you're able to pin them inside the 10, and there's a minute 36 on the clock. They've got no timeouts, down 7. I don't think it's the worst thing you could do. Certainly would do that versus blitzing all 11. But I do think that typically, like, I don't know, like there's part of me that thinks it would work. If I'm being totally honest, but I understand, but like I have the same itch about it that you and every person that's been around the NFL does, of just like, oh man, like we can't let the quarterback sit back there forever. But it's 11 dudes in coverage. 11. That's a lot of dudes.
I think that's the other thing too. It's like, yes. So is the idea, this is something you run into like at the high school level, for example, all the time. Like you can have a really good idea, offensive idea, right? I was an offensive coordinator. You have a really good offensive idea. And it's like, man, if we could get to this like O-line shift where we bump them over and we get to this unbalanced look, like they're not going to shift to it. But there's only a certain number of reps you have in a week, right? So
that's also,
that's the thing you're into is like, I'm going to waste 15 of my 100 reps on this, which we might not even get to in the game. And is it really adding that much value over something else that we have in our defense, right? So like we rep, drop 8 all the time. Like we know the rules, the guys know where to be, the guys know the issues and the failings of the coverage. They also know the strengths of the coverage. So like, why not lean into drop 8, even though it might not be optimized for this specific scenario? And I think the other thing that you brought up too, I think it would work once really, really well. I think it would be amazing one time. But I think once people knew what you were doing and knew that was in the bag and knew, especially if you personneled it, like, hey, when there's 10 DBs on the field, like they do right. This, like, I think you'd see a lot of draws. I think you would see a lot of draws.
That was the other thing yeah.
And it's going to be pretty gnarly because you're going to get a bunch of 5 offensive linemen, like basically like, the flying V from Mighty Ducks into the secondary there. And you're going to like, it's going to be a bloodbath. Like I think about, what was that, 2014, 15, when the Chiefs were playing Dallas, and they basically did that exact same play. Dallas was in prevent right before the half. They ran like a pseudo screen. Tyreek Hill catches the ball. The offensive line annihilates the secondary players, and Tyreek Hill goes and scores a touchdown. Like they didn't even take a shot. So I think that's another thing you have to negotiate too, is like you can still run the football, especially if you're talking about time parameters, like a minute 30, minute 40 left, even if there's no timeouts. Like offenses now are so efficient in those situations. So let's say I run a draw and it goes for 20. Like that's not good. You know what I mean? Like,
and especially if it's like, hey man, we're gonna create a flying V when there's about to be contact. Slide that way they can't jump on top of you and cause a pile, and so we can quickly get back up and everyone's at the same level. We can get another play off in 5-6 seconds if the referee will spot the ball on time, as opposed to having to unpile bodies and all that stuff.
Yeah, so I think it is a cool idea. I think it has. I think actually, I will say this. I think it does have a role. I think it would be interesting to get it like in like the mind of like Joe Wood Jr. and Dan Quinn and see how they would do it. In terms of problem solving. Because to me, I'm like, you could play like quarters coverage, but you could have the 4 guys in the back deep as hell, and then the guys underneath play man, and then you have 2 hook players, and then all of a sudden, like that seems like pretty challenging to kind of find space. They have protection over top. And as long as those guys don't get too trigger happy in terms of getting too deep or too shallow, I think you're probably okay. So I do think there is merit to it, but I do think there are a lot of limitations to it as well. And I think you also have to just keep in mind, and I said this at the beginning, like because it's an unlimited down all of a sudden, right? There's no shot clock. Like I think about like forgetting who this was. I think it was Miami a couple of years ago. They rushed 2. right? They had 2 rushers, 5 offensive linemen. They kind of like wadded it up. And I think Tua just kind of stood there and eventually found a completion over the middle of the field, kind of late in the down. It was like 5 seconds in, 6 seconds in. And then that dude's hitting the ball running. And then because they had the guys kind of in man or match, there was a lot of space on the left. They get the ball down, they move it to the middle of the field, they kick a field goal. So I think you always have to be leery of an untimed down scenario because of the ability for those receivers to just find the extra space. I think your analogy, or the way you modified my analogy about like it's a point guard in basketball and no one's covering him. At some point in that 30-second shot clock, someone's going to be wide open because someone's going to fall down. There's going to be a screen. There's going to be, a holding penalty. Like that's the other thing is the penalty element of this too is probably very, very high the longer the down goes on. So I think you always want to control the time of the down if you're the defense as much as possible. But I'm not saying there's no merit to this, but I do think there's a lot of limitations to when you would apply it.
The more I think about it, the less I like it in like the 2 minute, the more I like it. It's 3rd and 28.
Yeah, like stuff like that is better.
Where it's like,
right?
You have to get 28 yards. I know I know that like the underneath stuff, like I don't care if I give up 15 yards. It's 3rd and 28.
Right.
Like I actually think that would be the better application because I was trying to think too when you were talking about drop 8. I was like, well, when would you use drop 8 over this? Like if you replace the reps of drop 8. So when do we do drop 8? It's situations like that. Obviously red zone too. Red zone, you can't do this because of the quarterback draw element. Yeah. But like 3rd and super long or 4th, Eagles fans that are now tuning in, your ears perked up because I acknowledge your existence on the Jalen Hurts thing. 4th and 26 back in the day, the Freddie Mitchell play when Donovan McNabb found him. Like, yeah, let's get 11 at the sticks for that. Like that, fine. But beyond like as hey, we're gonna do this for an entire drive, and like you said, personnel you can't really call it once. Like I guess you could if you had like, do you put. I'm trying to think even on the Commanders, like, hey, it's Frankie and Kane Medrano and Bobby and like, all these guys that could rush, but also could play. Like, it's just too complicated. It's not worth it from a time standpoint, but there's a thought here somewhere.
There's something there for sure.
Yeah.
I think the thing that to your point, the thing that I kind of come back to is like, when would you apply it?
Right.
Because like even the 3rd and 20 thing is a little bit leery to me. It's like, basically in a 2-minute situation, no timeouts, there's like 12 seconds left in the game, and they're on their own like 30. I might pull something like this out, right? Where I can protect the sidelines, right, with my extra coverage players. And essentially they run versions of this. They're rushing 2, they're rushing 1, they're what I mean? They modify their base defense for this exact situation. So maybe I'm cheating here. But you can protect the sidelines. Ball over the middle of the field. We've clogged throwing windows. They have to get multiple plays executed, right? That's probably the most applicable situation. And again, I'm cheating. NFL teams do use a version of this, right? They kind of say, hey, we're going to rush 1. We're going to drop our defensive ends out. We're going to have the other defensive tackle kind of play that hook player. And they do use it in situations where they are on their, what is it, like minus? I don't know how you would do that.
They're
like,
on their own 30.
Yeah, they're on their own 30. They're going in. They need 2 plays to get into scoring position. So you can protect the sidelines. You can protect the middle of the field. So I think that would be the one time where I think this would be very applicable. So probably cheating a little bit with that answer. But again, like it is an interesting idea, just a kind of application scenario. There are some limitations to it.
Yeah. And the other part of Steven's preamble, though, he's like against particularly good offensive lines. Like I think that's an interesting element here too, where it's like, what is your success potential of rushing? But sometimes, as you said, it's about just making sure the down isn't uncapped from a time perspective. So in summary, yes, there's a reason teams haven't done it. No, it's not completely stupid. Yes, there's something here, but probably not as proposed. And that's the answer to Steven's self-described stupid question. Mailbag here on Take Command. Logan Paulson there. Craig Hoffman here. Next question from John. Hey, Craig, heard you're thin on mailbag questions. We were. Then we got a bunch of good ones, but we're running through them, so make sure you send yours in on Instagram at Hoffman.sports like John did with this question, or at HoffmanShow.com. You can also hit Logan at Logan_Paulson82. I have one that I've mulled over for a bit myself. If you and Logan were tasked with the goal of making the NFL more of a defensive league, what are the 2 to 3 things you change to make that happen? This is an interesting question.
I think there's
Fire
only
away.
one. I think there's only one thing you need to change, and it's the DB's ability to contact the receiver. I think if you go back to what was that? I want to say it was my rookie year, rookie maybe through my first 3 years in the league. Like illegal contact wasn't a thing. Like now it's like you can contact the receiver within 5 yards. It used to be like 10. So, and if you look at kind of how offenses have really exploded, how they've shifted to kind of this passing emphasis, I look at that as like the genesis of that move. And so if you wanted to make it a more defensive driven league, I think that would be the easiest way to get it back to that, kind of structure, right? Because one of the things now is like offenses are so good at creating space, receivers are so good at individually creating space, and one of the reasons they're able to do that is because the receiver, the DB, cannot be in contact with you past 5 yards. Which I don't know if you ever even like gone out and messed around, like, with your buddies. Like that's impossible.
So different.
It's impossible. And so I would just basically soften up soften, increase. I don't know which way that would go. The
Yeah.
PI
Depends on which
rules.
side of the ball you're on.
Yeah, I would increase the flexibility of the defense to contact the receiver, and I think you would see a defensive driven league in kind of no time flat, honestly.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one. And that's definitely the kind of thing that I was thinking about as well. And just to be clear, like you still have defensive holding, so you can't just grab dudes.
Right.
You still have pass interference. So when the ball is in the air, like you have to stop making contact. But the ability to maintain contact of a higher degree all the way down the field, absolutely. The other one that I was thinking of along that line was changing pass interference to a 15-yard penalty. I like the current rule because I think that penalties shouldn't be things that you can use to your advantage. So like for instance, in basketball, since it's a basketball analogy show, I hate the hack-a-shack thing. I hate the fact that you're like, I can just stop playing basketball, foul a bad free throw shooter. Now, other folks disagree. They're like, well, those bad free throw shooters could get better at free throws, but that's a different podcast. For this, I like the fact that you can't just tackle a dude because you got beat and not give up a 60-yard gain. And even if you can not give up an 80-yard touchdown because you trip a guy, 60 yards down the field, fine. There's nothing you can do about that. But I don't want that 60 to turn into 15. But there's also... it's a judgment-based enough and I would say controversial enough call frequently enough that if you're like, hey, it's just going to even out in the end. Sometimes referees are going to miss. Sometimes, DBs might tackle a guy and it actually is a more fair penalty to just make it 15 yards. That is absolutely one that you could change. And I'd say the last officiating thing that I would change, which is really what we're talking about here is rules and officiating, is defensive holding not being on the perimeter and really in general not being a first down, because there are times where it's like, Benjamin St. Juste got one last year that was like completely on the other side of the play. It's 3rd and 10. He holds a guy off the line. And it's like, that had nothing to do with the play. And we're just giving an automatic first down. Yeah. And so I think some of the automatic first down stuff, I get why you have it, because if you, for instance, defensive hold on a run play or on a pass play and it prevents something that could have been a first down from happening, I get why the rule exists the way it is. But if you wanted to say we're going to make this harder on offense, those would be the couple of things that immediately came to mind for me.
Yeah, I think anytime you can contact a receiver, like I think back to my time in college, my first couple of years in the league, like even running like a shallow cross, so like a 4 to 6 yard route across the middle of the field was like a really kind of dubious proposition back in the day, because like linebackers could contact you, and they could contact you violently, and their rule was like you have to violently collision any crosser, like collision crossers. That's like a coaching point that people used to give. It's still a thing, but you can't do it to the same extent. So you could literally be running across the middle of the field and it almost felt like you were getting crackback blocked. So like, think about now, like where we talk about the middle of the field being such a dynamic part of the passing game. Like imagine if like I'm trying to cross the middle of the field to clear out a dig or something like that, but I just get stonewalled there, so that the hook player to the far side doesn't need to respect me. He can just get depth underneath that dig. And so any of that stuff that has to do with contacting receivers, holdings, all that kind of thing. Like I think back to like the steel curtain, for example, and watching, I forget the corner, but he was like a Hall of Fame player. He's big guy, he's 6'3", he's like in that 215, 220 type range. He would literally just tackle dudes. Like they could not get off the line of scrimmage because it was like such a violent holding. And so we were like, man, that defense was so good. but you couldn't throw the football, right? You could not, because the receivers could not create enough space down the field or at the line of scrimmage. And we just talked, and it's funny, these questions stack. And I think Craig probably did it on purpose because he's a smart dude. But like we talked about making sure that there's not an unlimited time on the down, right? So all of a sudden you've got this good rush. You jam the receiver so violently that they're not into their route until a second and a half into the play. It's going to be a sack. It's going to be an incompletion. It's going to be an errant throw. And I think all that kind of stuff would make it way more defensive friendly. If you get the more contact you can get on receivers, the more you can disrupt pass concepts. And everyone says, "Oh, what about pass rush?" Like, to me, pass rushing is kind of what it was. Unless you wanted to kind of get back into that, what I would characterize as unsafe play of like the late 80s, where it's like you can hit a defenseless receiver. You could kind of roll. Like, I remember, I played in this era to a certain extent. I got the tail end of it, but like they used to coach defensive linemen to like fall down if they weren't going to get there, and like actively roll to the quarterback's front leg as he's throwing to get him to like a knee hyperextension so he wouldn't want to throw it. All those things make it less enticing to throw the football if you're a quarterback. And anytime you can get that guy uncomfortable and anytime you can disrupt the timing, like it's going to lead to more defensive success. So I do think, I'm not saying, first off, let me just be clear. I'm not unhappy with the rules as they currently exist, but if you wanted to make a more defensive driven league, it would be very easy to legislate to get there. Like I think back again, like, when you were jumping up for a football, right? And the quarterback laid you out there, like they used to be able to just light you up. Like it wasn't, you had to be very, very fastidious and decisive as a receiver about when I was going to go up for the football. And now because of the protections, which I think are appropriate, I can be much more confident about going up for the football. So I think all that stuff, like the physicality rules, the contact rules, you could easily get the league back to like 9-6 type of scoring parameters in a heartbeat. And I think I don't think that's necessarily good for the game, but that's how I would do it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And most of these I like. It's like, the safeties can't even hit receivers anymore. It's like, get there earlier and get the ball. Like if you get to the ball and you can break on the ball, like that's your job. Have they made it harder? Yes, because you actually have to get to the ball, not just to the person. But like I like those rules from a safety standpoint, and there is a way to do it that is legal. You just have to be better. Two more questions on this, like follow-ups. One, is there anything you can do in the run game? We talked about all pass stuff. Is there any rule change or some other change that I'm not thinking of categorically that you can make in the run game to make things better for defenses outside of calling holding more on offense?
Well, I was going to say defensive holding would be a thing that was much more liberally applied or liberally ignored, like when I first got in the league. So like you get that big nose guard, he would grab the center, he'd grab the guard, kind of underhook both and just run down line of scrimmage with them, and then the linebacker's free to make a play. You know what I'm saying? Like that type of stuff.
Yeah. So call less defensive holding, call more offensive holding.
Correct. Yeah. And I think like that would like when I first got in the league, like that was a huge thing. Like think about the Baltimore Ravens, right? That's how like Saragusa played, right? He was so good at taking on both and letting those linebackers run free. So I think that would be the first thing that comes to mind in terms of running the football. Because again, like one of the things about running the football is it's just like we've talked about this before on the show. It's just math, right? Like if I'm willing, so think about this, like if I increase the flexibility of the defender to hold and contact the receiver, I can play more single high looks. I can play more 8-man boxes, which is going to default help me in my run support, right? So think back to the New England Patriots, think back to the Seattle Seahawks when they were the Legion of Boom. Like they were playing cover 3, but those guys, like, and Richard Sherman has said this, like he's like, I was going to contact you as much as I possibly could and basically force the referee to make a call. And because they were able to do that, they're able to play more single high safety. Obviously they have a Hall of Fame safety. I always forget his name. But,
Earl Thomas. Yeah.
Earl Thomas, right? He was a maniac. And then you got Cam Chancellor as an extra linebacker in the box. So like I remember thinking back to the fronts they used to play, like they were gapped out. There was nowhere to go with the football. Everyone had to win on one-on-one just to get to a 3-yard gain. So, and that's all because the perimeter was allowed to contact the receivers more. And so I think even though the contacting receivers seems like it just helps from a passing standpoint, it also helps from a running standpoint. And so that would be like my thing. Yeah. Allow defensive linemen to hold more, but also like, if you're more dynamic and more physical in the passing game, it helps with the run stuff too, because you can add a run support player.
Yeah. Is there now? Last question. We've said that we like most of the rules the way they are. Is there any that you actually would apply that you're like, oh no, this change that we mentioned, I actually would like to see?
So the purist in me, and this is probably because this is when I grew up playing and watching football, is sometimes the DPI stuff to me is a little bit tenuous. Like run a route to win is basically my thought. Like be physical, be strong, like fight for your space, like play football. And again, I think there's two sides to that coin. Like, you know, with the steel curtain and they're tackling receivers to the ground as they're running the route. I don't want that, but I would like them to play ball. You know what I'm saying? Like, can we just play, be physical,
play with honor?
Work on our craft a little bit. And I think those ones where I'd say, you know, maybe be a little bit more flexible with defensive contact just in general, I think would be helpful I think it just makes it better. And again, like I like to watch the all-22. I like to watch these kind of positional battles. I like to watch that element of the game, but I understand from a league standpoint, that's extremely hard to legislate. Like it's extremely hard to be like, oh, like this one's good, this one's not. When, you know, like we all know all contact isn't necessarily created equal and people are going to abuse the rules. Like as Richard Sherman has admitted to, and most DBs admit to, like when I talked to Fred, like he's like, you want to push that envelope as far as you can because it gives you an advantage the more you can push it. So that'd be the one that I'd like to just see just from like a football purity standpoint. But again, like that's not how it works. You know, like you can't ask an official to make that call consistently when like it becomes so much of a judgment call, I guess.
Yeah, that's my issue. Like I would like to take away some of the automatic first downs legitimately, but the problem is like, how do you know that player wasn't like, you're saying like, oh, that was an away from the play defensive hold.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you know? Like if that hold didn't happen, is that guy now involved in the play? And like sometimes it's very obvious, but now you're asking the officials to have some kind of judgment that I don't think is probably going to be exercised correctly.
It's not fair. It's not fair to them. Like I think that's the other thing too, is everyone gives the refs such a hard time, but watching the game from the sideline like every week, it's amazing how fast everything happens. And it's amazing how easy it is to miss stuff. And like, you'll just catch a flash of something out of the corner of your eye. And that looked like DPI, but I'm not sure. So do you throw a flag? So I think the more definitively clean the rules are, the easier it is for those guys. And then ultimately the better the product is. So as much as I want certain tweaks and things here, I understand that like it's extremely hard to watch a game live and officiate it. And so like making it easier for those guys is probably my number one priority. Yeah.
If you don't add like 5 more officials, which would suck, that would slow the game down tremendously. But it's like, oh, is that away from the play? All right. Hey, umpire, let's, you know, I was watching that guy. Were you watching the quarterback's helmet stripe to see which way he was looking? Like there's no way to enforce it. So, I would, if they were like, hey, defensive holding is a 10-yard penalty and no more, automatic first down, I'd be fine with that. Where it's like, okay, it's 3rd and 15. Are we giving away a first down on a defensive hold? No. If it's 3rd and 4, we are. Okay, that's just a yardage thing. I'm fine with that versus the automatic. But, you know, that is what it is. Wrapping up here on Take Command. We still have a couple questions we're not going to get to this week, but you can get your mailbag questions in to add to our stockpile because we do need some for next week and the week after and the week after that. HoffmanShow.com. You can use that to send us a note or on Instagram like Adam did at Hoffman.sports or Logan_Paulson82. And we're going to close with a Terry McLaurin question. Logan, and this is a specific but also general question, but I thought this was good. We all agree Terry is really good. Some would argue great/elite. My question is, if he was drafted in round 1 instead of round 3, would the perception be different? And in general, how hard is it to change draft perception? By the way, I think this goes both ways. Some guys who are clearly way underdrafted never get the hype they deserve, and some high picks get chance after chance and never live up to the draft status. Anyway, enjoy the show and keep up the great analysis. Adam. I think this is fascinating because I think it's 100% true that if Terry was a first-round pick, he would be looked at around the league differently. I don't know how much it would have actually impacted his contract status over the years or anything now. Would he more universally be agreed upon as a top 10 receiver, which I think he definitively is based off of his production, especially considering the quarterback play, which was really subpar until last year when he had his best season ever? Yes. And I do think that, obviously we see guys bounce around the league that get second chances, but that's also kind of, what happens if you earn, quote unquote, being a first round pick based off your talent. What do you think about this though?
No, I think that's 100% true. I think, even like we were doing, like a show with Jacoby, in terms of whether he deserves to be, Joe Jacoby, whether he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. And he was an undrafted free agent, obviously. And there was another guy named Jimbo who played for the Bears, who had less Pro Bowls, less All Pros, less Super Bowl appearances, but got in, I think it was like 2020 or something like that. And one of the things about, in terms of comparing the two players and what the difference is, like one of them was a first round draft pick and one of them was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And so obviously like there's this name and notoriety element that I think is extremely important. And especially for people who don't follow the NFL super closely, I think, first round draft picks, like their names circulate more, you're more aware of them. And I think that is not 100% true of teams, but it's similar to how teams view them because they have their draft grades, they have their departments, they have, again, guys that will go through and give them their colored on the board and like where they fit and slot. And those first round draft guys are always going to get more bites at the apple. And it is a little bit of confirmation bias. Like when you're like, oh my gosh, like Terry McLaurin, the guy that I said was a first round pick, is actually playing like a first round pick. Like we should go pay that guy like a first round pick on a second contract extension, right? So as much as it is, it shouldn't be that way. I think to a large extent it is that way, and I think that's just it's an unfortunate consequence of kind of human nature. I think at this point it's really hard for them to leave their priors at the door, and I think you see that with Terry. So I think if Terry was a first round selection, I do think the national discussion about him would be very different. I think that's one of the reasons like Glendon Fletcher, as a good example, is not in the Hall of Fame compared to like Ray Lewis, like he played in smaller markets, the whole thing. But like, it's because there's not this, like, he wasn't at the forefront of thought the same way that some of these other guys are. And like the league does this also. Like they take first round picks and they make stories about them. People talk about them. They discuss them. And that conversation just brings that player to the forefront more. And like when you're a third round pick, even though you might not be playing, even though you're playing really, really well, like that conversation is less potent because the priors aren't there for the discussion. So yeah, I do think it would be different for Terry in terms of definitely national recognition. I'm not sure if it would totally affect his contract value, but like maybe it would. I don't know. I can't speak to that. Like, because I watch him every week. I think I understand really very well like what he is, what he can and can't do. So I feel like I have a very clear understanding of him. But like not everyone gets to watch him the way we get to watch him. Even other teams, like when you're not playing in like national games, you're not playing against big opponents, like that's a knock, and I think like ultimately, I do think it probably has negatively impacted his earning potential in the league, quite honestly.
Yeah. Terry's also a guy that doesn't like to do a lot of interviews. It's just not his deal. He doesn't care about the fame, which you can say is good or bad or indifferent, but like that, if you're not featured on the pregame shows, you're not doing the podcast circuit, you're not seeing at the parties, you're not out there in that star way. I think that's how you can overcome it to some extent, is you have to like build your profile. And Terry is more interested in going fishing, and that's fine. That brings him joy. Go catch your fish. So I think that's definitely part of it. And then the other thing I think that is especially true in this league is there's a reason initially, whether that bears out true or not, why later round guys are later round guys. And for Terry, for instance, it's like size and production, whatever. And he's obviously produced at an incredibly high level, but he's still the size he was. His awkwardness and his catching, even though it has never really affected him because the production is there, like that's still a thing. And then those things still are there. And so people are still looking for that to be the reason why you're not going to succeed. And what I was going to say specific to this league especially is NFL is not for long. And eventually that stuff tends to be right because everyone has a downturn. Even if you play 15 years, eventually you get to be right. Like eventually the critics they get to talk longer than you get to play. And so I think that's the other hard part of it is like, oh, I have concern about this, a guy's speed. Even if it's not a factor for 5-6 years, by the time you're getting to your third contract, especially, it's like, well, I never thought he was that fast to begin with. And it's like, yeah, because he's lost 3 steps because he's now 30 and has, played a couple thousand NFL snaps. But he's really smart, knows how to overcome it, and hasn't affected his production the entire time. And he's been to 5 Pro Bowls. But eventually the critics for athletes across sports, but especially in this league on a compressed timeline, get to be right. And I think that is a hard part about narrative changing as well. It has to be so overwhelming that it's just inarguable. Like Jerry Rice, is inarguable. Like it has to be pretty substantial that that criticism was wrong to really overcome the narrative, even if there's other stuff that's more important.
Yeah, and even with Jerry Rice, he was a first round pick. It wasn't like he was, an undrafted free agent who built his way up. So I think that's again, it goes back to confirmation bias. I can't tell you how many times I've written a report, watched a guy in college, then watched the guy in the league and be like, oh, that's the same stuff I saw in college. That's not really fair. Each time you come to the athlete, it should be something completely different. But again, I'm guilty of it, right? You put the work in, you have familiarity with them. For these guys in the last draft class, I watched 5 games on some of these guys, 10 games in some cases, where you really you think the guy, but I think that's the other thing. Is people change, skill sets change, people develop, and Terry has changed and developed over his time in the NFL. And yeah. I think it's hard for people to switch. And when you talk to NFL scouts about former first round picks, there is this oh my gosh, he was this in college. I remember the thing with who was it? It was Jamarcus Russell or somebody like that, maybe Josh Rosen, a guy like that was obviously struggling in the league. But he got multiple bites at the apple because everyone had a first round grade on him. Everyone said we can extrapolate this potential. I think
Russell's the rare guy that didn't. Rosen.
I think it was Rosen maybe. Yeah. And so he got a bunch of opportunities, bunch of different teams, bunch of looks, practice squads, the whole thing. Because even though you see that he's struggling, you see that he's not working out, you're going to give him that opportunity. I do think it's the same thing with people that get big contracts. Because teams are oh, he was good in college, he was solid in the league, we'll be able to maximize his potential with this next contract, this next big deal, this next opportunity.
We can fix him.
Yeah, we can fix him. And he maybe doesn't even be fixed, but maybe we can take him from, C+ to a B+. And then all of a sudden, we have that ability because the talent's there. And so I think with lower drafted guys, you tend to see teams that go yeah, he's doing well right now, but he's overachieving, or oh yeah, and I think that's the problem a little bit. Again, with confirmation bias, with your biases in general, and it's really hard to shake them from the pre-draft process. I do think there were times in my career where being an undrafted free agent hurt me in terms of my ability to go and talk to the perception of the front office to me, and I'm not the best athlete. I understand my physical limitations probably better than anybody, but I do feel like there were times where it was oh yeah, you were an undrafted guy, or you were this, and you had these limitations, and that's why you're always going to be kind of a vet minimum type of guy. And I think there's a lot of guys that experience that over the course of their careers, how your draft position impacts the rest of your career in terms of league perception.
For sure. There is a great piece that came out last week in The Athletic about Greg Popovich, and there's some other coaches, but the main anecdote in the story is about Popovich, and I'm trying to remember the player. Keith Langford was the player who, if you're listening to this podcast and you also know who Keith Langford is, then congratulations, you're in a very small Venn diagram with me. But Keith Langford was a guy who didn't really pan out in the NBA. He wound up playing overseas for a while, but he was a guard at Kentucky, very good at Kentucky. And he was drafted or picked up undrafted free agent by the Spurs. And he's playing really well or decently well in the preseason, enough that he's in the mix for the last roster spot. And the night before the final preseason game, he and Popovich have a discussion and tells him what he needs to do. He doesn't quite do it well enough, and the other guy winds up getting the spot. And, when he's been cut, you've been released before in the NFL, you kind of know how, and especially here, I'm assuming it was pretty cold considering who was in charge at the time. I don't think you got a nice call and a long sit down with the head coach. Popovich goes to Langford's hotel room personally, doesn't send a staffer, not an assistant coach, nevertheless a low-level video guy to be hey man, need your playbook. Popovich personally goes to Langford's hotel room and is teary-eyed because he's so upset that he's got to cut him, and has a conversation about, this is what we need you to do. This is what you need to do to succeed in the league going forward. And work on your craft. And like, we really enjoyed having you. And they had like a human moment. And Popovich was like, I'm going to give every player on my roster the chance to succeed because I don't know who's ultimately going to step up to the plate. And sure enough, they had an injury, and like 3 months later, he's coming back with the Spurs. And that first discussion, they're like, "Hey, man, remember what we told you? Like, this is what you need." And he's able to stick with San Antonio for a little bit. But if you don't, and I think Quinn's very good at this, by the way, is also where this lands and comes back to command land, is if you give every player on your roster the absolute best chance of being the best version of themselves, and you can drop your priors, you're going to find hidden gems. You're going to find guys who you didn't anticipate playing well, and you're going to have the best team possible. You're going to maximize your talent. If you just be like, well, that guy's an undrafted free agent, we'll get him a couple of reps when everyone else is tired, that's how you miss on those types of players. And so it really is an organizational top-down approach to allowing, to use like cheesy millennial language, allowing people to be the best version of themselves. But if you don't allow them and give them opportunities and a plan and investment to be that best version, then you don't know, you truly do not know what you have.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like when we were doing this thing for Joe Jacoby, right? And like learning about his backstory. Like he was one of, I want to say it was like 20 UDFA offensive linemen that they brought in, to the team. And I think about like the draft process back then and how hard it was to get film on guys and how hard the investigation process was. Like now with PFF, like you can watch whoever you want, cut ups, this, highlights, lowlights, the whole thing in 5 seconds, right? And you get like the access is just tremendous. So your knowledge of the player is so different. But I do think like back then, the likelihood of you missing was much higher, And so I do think that now that's another thing that like that's changed about the game, right? Is like you're talking about with Dan, like giving those guys the opportunity to be more than what you saw on film, more than what you saw in the evaluation, I think is extremely important. And I'm not saying that's what's happening here with Terry. It's more of like a league perspective, obviously. But I do think like because the draft process has gotten so specific, so acute, so specialized, that this bias kind of is pervasive throughout the league in a way that it wasn't before. And it makes it hard for guys like you're describing, the bottom half of the roster guys, to like make an impression because you're overcoming whatever you showed in college. Like you're changing the narrative in a way that's becoming much more challenging to do. And I think, I think you brought up a good point. Like Dan does a good job of that. And I think that's awesome to see that there's still coaches that are looking to do that, and kind of find the best version of the roster and in a way that is challenging to do.
And it's everything from the personal investment and taking time with each guy to like, hey, let's make sure the fours get some reps. Like, let's do 2 fields of practice and go 1s and 3s and 2s and 4s. So the 4s don't get 3 reps and we never know what that guy can actually do. Let's give him a chance against the 2s to see if he actually belongs on the field. All right, that's our show for today. Again, mailbag questions, hoffmanshow.com, and then on Instagram at hoffman.sports and at Logan_Paulson82. Be back on Thursday with our defensive positional group rankings for the NFC East. And until then, if you made it this far and are not subscribed, now's a good time, and we'll see you next time.